Storrs Johnson, and I'm board president of the governing board here at Monterey Peninsula College. And I just wanted to stop in when I knew that you were starting to thank you for being here. You know, community colleges, and especially the best community college, which is MPC, should be the forum for societal issues. That alone would be the right reason for you to be here. But beyond that, you're doing the right thing. And that simply is the best reflection on everyone. So I want to thank you for being here. Pastor, I hope it's okay if I stand in your place and say, God bless you for doing this because you're making it a better world. And we all need a better world. Thank you.
I'm a student here at MPC and also a member of Alpha Gamma Sigma.
Is that speaker supposed to be on?
Yeah. Talk really loud.
Is this better? Even louder. How about now? Oh, there we are. Winning. Thanks, Dr. Haffa. Okay, so my name is Kathleen Ball. I'm a student here at MPC and also a member of the Alpha Gamma Sigma Honor Society. Before we get started, just a quick reminder, if you have cell phones on, would you please put them on silent or turn them off, just so we can have an uninterrupted discussion this evening. So welcome to the first annual Civil Engagement Seminar brought to you by the Monterey Peninsula College Alpha Gamma Sigma Honor Society in cooperation with the Associated Students of MPC. This gathering was made possible by funds received from MPC's Interclub Council, and for that we are immensely grateful. Our topic of discussion tonight is homelessness in Monterey County, a subject that is at times out of sight but rarely out of the minds of community members. We are here tonight because we are united in our humanity through concern for the health of our communities and their members, even the most disadvantaged. Our panel members come from different aspects of our communities and will share different but equally valid perspectives on this challenging issue. One thing we urge you to keep in mind is the idea of critical tolerance, accepting as much of another person's perspective as you possibly can instead of looking for ways in which you disagree with them. Please understand that everyone in this room has valid concerns and no one is heartless simply because they disagree with each other. If we enter into this conversation with attitudes of compassion and compromise and with the stated goal of expanding our understanding of homelessness, are never be successful. We've chosen to use as a backdrop to our conversation the Monterey County Homeless Census and Survey, conducted in January 2015 by the nonprofit group Applied Survey Research, based out of Watsonville. The survey results offer a snapshot or point-in-time, person-by-person count of sheltered and unsheltered homeless in our county. Additionally, the report includes data collected from a survey of 444 homeless individuals that asked them questions to build profiles of their experiences. We'll be using some of these data points as guides for our discussion items posed to our 5 panel members. We ask that you hold on to any questions for our panel members until the question and answer session at the end. Before we introduce our panel members, we'd like to share some significant data points from the 2015 report. We've printed out copies and handed them out to you at the door so you can reference them or take them home with you. The executive summaries are very useful. So first off, the report surveyed a total of 2,308 homeless men, women, and children in January 2015. 49% of the participants were men, 50% were women, and 1% identified as transgender. 47% of respondents were white, 32% multiracial, and 15% were African American. When asked about what the biggest obstacles were that kept them homeless, almost 3/4 of respondents said they couldn't afford the rent in Monterey County. Additionally, more than half cited not having a job or income as a secondary issue. 57% of respondents reported their monthly income as $449 or less. 71% of participants were unsheltered, 29% were sheltered. Nearly a third of the unsheltered lived on the street, and a quarter of the unsheltered lived in their cars. That's over 50% that were either on the street or in their cars. Nearly 6 out of 10 respondents reported some sort of health condition, such as a substance usage problem, a psychiatric condition, physical disability, or chronic health problem. And finally, 59% of respondents received some sort of government support, 62% received free meals, 28% received shelter day services, and 23% used transitional housing. And now to introduce our panel members, I'll invite my colleague, Justin.
Good evening. I'm Justin Gill, Treasurer of the Alpha Gamma Sigma Honor Society. Our first speaker for this evening's lecture, Dr. Alan Haffa, comes to us from Monterey City Council. Dr. Haffa has been an ongoing supporter and advocate for the homeless, and was among those who supported the safe parking and homeless shelter in the 3-2 vote in January of 2016. Dr. Haffa was again in support of the ordinance when it was revised and approved the second time it was introduced a month later. Dr. Haffa supported the search for alternative housing options for the homeless during the initial vote, which included affordable housing for low-income individuals, and continued to seek such options throughout the process. Please welcome Dr. Alan Haffa. Our next speaker, Todd Sondgroth, comes to us as a resident of Carmel Valley. Mr. Sondgroth has been on a mission to end homelessness in Monterey County through his efforts in building portable homeless shelters. Sondgroth has spent time living as a homeless person in order to raise $10,000 for charities to help Monterey County's homeless population. Being able to turn that empathy into compassion and action, he says, is what drives him to go out and do something about the homeless issue. He is currently the Chief Executive Officer for a Change of Heart Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to help empower those to reclaim the foundational principles of love and compassion. Please welcome Mr. Todd Sondgroth. Our third panel member is representing the Monterey Police Department, Sergeant Ethan Andrews. Sergeant Andrews has worked for the Monterey Police for 10 years. He is currently the supervisor of the Community Action Team, a specialized unit that works on community policing problems, special events, and long-term projects. Sergeant Andrews obtained his bachelor's degree in criminal justice from California State University, Chico, and his master's degree in public administration from Golden State University. Please welcome Sergeant Andrews. Our next speaker, Mr. Brian Bajari, comes to us as a resident of Monterey. Mr. Bajari has been a long-standing advocate for the homeless since his days as a pastor in transforming communities. A former pastor, community builder, crisis minister, and executive director of Care Corps International, Mr. Bajari has been standing up for human and civil rights, social action, disaster, and humanitarian relief, education, poverty, and the alleviation of poverty. He has presented before in Monterey TEDx forums and is currently working with Safe Hive, a Spero collaborative and nonprofit organization, catalyzing people in different organizations and working toward effective and contextually beneficial hope-building causes in order to make people's lives more fulfilling, their organizations more productive, and our world more brilliant. Please welcome Mr. Brian Bajari. Our final speaker, Reverend Cindy Storrs, comes to us from the Monterey United Methodist Church. Reverend Storrs came to Monterey UMC in July of 2014 and has worked with community members to address the homeless issue on the Monterey Bay. She was a leading figure during the time when Monterey opened their first warming shelter. She has provided space in her church for the homeless in the past, which can currently house 50 homeless people 7 nights a week during the wintertime. She has been at the forefront in an effort to open a permanent shelter on the Central Coast, which she says is far from over. She continues to provide her support in hopes that the city zoning ordinances will help speed up the process and that they will be willing to ease regulations to allow churches to temporarily house the homeless by removing permitting regulations in times of natural disasters. Please welcome Reverend Cindy Storrs. Now I'd like all of you to please welcome our moderators, Maury Vasquez and Justin Elliott Jones, President and Vice President of the Alpha Gamma Sigma Society.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Thanks for coming. We're expecting a large crowd. This is really nice. to it. So we do have.
Can you speak up really loud, please?
Sure thing. We'll be here about an hour and a half or 2 hours discussing the issues of homelessness. We have some questions directed for our speakers here, so we get a better understanding of the situation here facing the Monterey Peninsula. So our first question goes to Dr. Alan Haffa. Tourism is a huge part of Monterey County's economy, and many business owners worry about the negative economic effects from perceived health, safety, and aesthetic troubles that come with having a homeless population. Are these concerns misplaced, and the effects smaller than they believe?
If folks can't hear, you might want to just move up, because we don't have a...
There you go.
So, you want to take the chance now to move up. So the question about business owners and their concerns and whether they're legitimate, they are legitimate. I mean, we certainly have a homeless problem. It's very clear. Anyone who opens their eyes can see that we have a homeless problem. And we are a tourist destination, and people don't want to see a lot of poor people on the streets when they come to Monterey. That's obvious. It's also a problem for our residents, but it's also a problem for the homeless people. You know, nobody wants to be living. Very few people want to be living in these situations, and the ones who think they do suffer from mental illness situations. So I think it isn't so much that their business owners don't have a legitimate concern. They do. I think it's what do we do about it? And I think what we do about it is something that we as a community are evolving and improving our understanding both of the problem and what are the possible solutions. So just sort of driving people out doesn't work. We move people from, let's say, a business district to a residential district, removing the problem. Or if we move everybody out of Monterey altogether, then what do? We move them to Pacific Grove or Seaside or Salinas. Salinas does the same thing. You're just kind of shuffling people around. So it doesn't take too long to realize that isn't working. So collectively, the region needs to figure out a solution that actually puts people in shelter.
So we have two questions for you, Mr. Haffa. When asked about the primary obstacles to obtaining permanent housing, homeless community members cited not being able to afford rents and not being able to get a job. In fact, more than half the respondents reported an average monthly income of about $449 or less. What can the county and residents do to address the challenges?
So let me first just validate the premise of the question. It is primarily jobs and the cost of housing that are the main drivers. There are other issues, and we can get into them, but those are the biggest issues. And if you look at when this crisis began, it was as we were moving into the housing bubble and as the recession hit. So if the homeless census you talked about, you go back to, I think it's 2007, there were like maybe 1,200 homeless persons in Monterey County. By 2009, it had jumped to 2,500. And we've pretty much been at somewhere between 2,400 and 2,600 since then. So we've come out of this recession, but you still have almost 2,500 people on any given night in our county who don't have permanent housing. So it is a real problem, and I think we need to address housing and we need to address jobs. The housing issue, one of the ways that I'm going to suggest the city address that is taking some money, how much is yet to be determined, and what I'd like to do is have a pilot program where we work with the nonprofits and we give them some of this money to be able to offer homeless persons a rent subsidy. So if you're only making $400 a month, even if you're making $1,000 a month, you cannot afford to rent an apartment in the Monterey Peninsula. And so, but if you are making that, and maybe we can find an apartment for $800 or $900, this money, what I'm imagining, could be used to subsidize that difference. So that's one way. But still, the larger problem is there's not enough affordable housing. And to do that, we need to get creative we've asked our staff to look at all the different possible strategies to create more affordable housing in the city and to come back to us within 6 months with a list of those proposals. And then we as a city need to have a conversation. Which of these are we comfortable with? Which of these we're not? Because more affordable housing is going to mean things like more parking. You know, more cars on the street parking, it's going to mean more density. People don't like that, but we're going to have a conversation. Do we like seeing people on the streets? You know, so we have to balance, you know, these competing interests. On the one hand, nobody, I don't think, likes seeing people living on the streets. On the other hand, lots of people don't like density. So what are we going to do? We got to figure it out, and we've got to figure it out together.
Can I interject? So, as the greatest condition of being homeless is the fact that we need houses, and then concurring for development of said houses, rather than creating these low-income subsidized houses, couldn't there be a more direct action, such as Todd's project, the Lighthouse, but instead creating kind of areas where we could have temporary housing for these individuals, and also maybe even counselors and such, so people could develop themselves and, you know, kind of come back into society as we see as normal?
Absolutely. I don't think there's necessarily going to be one solution that by itself is going to take care of this problem. And so we need what you're talking about, transitional housing. We definitely need transitional housing as well. And if there are affordable ways that we can do that, I know Todd has a project, I'm sure we'll get to in a second, that does that, then I think we need to find a way to work with him and other nonprofits to make that happen. But there are challenges to that, which we'll probably get into later.
Excellent. Well, do any of the other panelists have anything to discuss on this topic at the moment? Oh, yeah. Well, if you want.
I think Alan is absolutely right. The underlying issue when it's related to chronic homelessness is homes. You know, I think that's what we have to get at, and let's not start talking about all the other issues. It's lack of affordable housing. Bottom line. And we, as a society, have to determine whether or not adequate housing is a right or it's a privilege. That's up to us. And I know, I see this room full of people who are all concerned about this and are doing their own work. I mean, many of you could be up here on the panel yourselves. I know. I mean, you guys are activists and organizers. But I think we have to get down to the bottom line is that we have an affordable housing crisis in Monterey County. I just looked at the Monterey Craigslist today, a one-bedroom place in Monterey. What does it start at? $1,000 for a one-bedroom room. That's crazy. That's crazy. But that's the reality.
I know.
Well, speaking of housing from an economic standpoint, inflation would cause the rent, but I like your point saying, are we going to consider adequate housing for individuals just a privilege or a right? And that is a huge concern because we're all human beings and we should all take motions to care for others.
So maybe I could speak a little bit about our housing element and sort of the debate behind that. So every 7 years or so, a city has to approve what's called a housing element. It's basically a plan to how you are going to address housing and planning for housing. And there were some suggestions that were brought forward, but again, they're controversial. And so it's really a matter of people trying to decide what is more important because, and that's life, you know, things are not always simple. So one of the ideas is to permit what are called second units That would be, let's say somebody who's a homeowner has an extra bedroom, and it might have a door that opens up externally. And that could be rented as basically as an apartment unit. Right now, that's illegal. It's illegal to have a second unit. It's also illegal to put in what's called a granny unit, which would be like a separate, maybe in your backyard, you build a small unit and want to rent that out. Currently, those kinds of things are illegal. What they would do is allow us potentially to increase quite a bit the amount of affordable housing. But you have to balance that against neighborhood concerns that there's going to be more cars, and it's reality. You got more people living there, it's more dense. You're going to have cars on the street. That's just a reality. You may have people who don't like somebody walking through their neighbor's backyard or side yard to get to this second unit. There may be concerns that a granny unit, as it's so called, will be too big and create some kind of aesthetic diminishment of their own property. I do believe most of those could be addressed through ordinance to make sure that privacy of neighbors is respected and not violated, to make sure that the amount of parking doesn't exceed a certain amount. I think that we could address those, but it's going to take a lot of conversation with residents and neighbors to make sure that we're comfortable with how we do that. That's one way we could potentially add quite a bit of additional housing. And there's a few other things that we could do as well, like that, where we would be basically infill into current places.
Okay. So, Mr. Sergeant Andrews, this question is posed for you. The largest subpopulation of homeless is in the survey were chronically homeless adults who'd been either continuously homeless for a year or more, or had experienced 4 or more episodes of homelessness within the past 3 years. Some people believe that the homeless is an issue for the criminal justice system to work out. Do you agree or disagree, and why?
It's, as Dr. Haffa said, it's a community problem. We all know this, and it's going to take community solutions. I think there's a misperception that people may look at homelessness as individuals who refuse to basically comply with the standards of society, to comply with the laws that we've set forth, and they want to go and live a life that's free to do what they choose, and then they frequently will violate some law, whether it's an infraction, misdemeanor, or felony, and then it's the police's responsibility to come in and then take care of this problem, that somehow we can arrest our way out of homelessness. The reality of it is that homeless people are homeless for a number of different factors. Each story is unique and different, and most of them are, in fact, law-abiding citizens and part of the community itself. Law enforcement does interact with the homelessness on a daily basis. That means that we're going to be a huge role player in the solution, because we have a lot of intelligence and a lot of the ability to be ambassadors for the homeless, to put them in touch with the right service providers, and that's something that we try to do, and we try to strive to be better at, especially in the last 10 years since I've been in the Monterey Police Department. The other reality of it is that, there is a small group of the homeless that are frequent chronic violators of the law. But we're talking about very minor infractions and misdemeanors, and those are not crimes that we send people to prison for. Those are crimes that you might go to jail for a night or a day, or 2 weeks, or something like that. So even then, arresting folks is not necessarily going to be the solution. However, I'm a firm believer that there does have to be a mechanism in place that holds people accountable for when they do violate the community standards. It's not that we turn a blind eye to it, but we do enforce things constitutionally, equitably, whether you're homeless or not homeless. So long story short, no, it's not a police problem, it's a whole community problem, but the police are going to be actively involved in the solution because we have so many opportunities to interact with them on a regular basis.
Can you elaborate on violating community regulations?
So I call them community standards, things like that, the city code. Monterey has a city code, every city has their own city code. Our city code has a lot of things that most communities have. You can't have an open container of alcohol in most areas. But if you're homeless and you have nowhere to go and you want to have an alcoholic beverage, you're probably going to violate the city code by having that beverage out in public. So that would be a violation of that community standard. But again, that's not something that I might come out and give you a ticket, cite you for it or something like that, but you're not going to go to jail for it.
So curiosity that came up in terms of finding the homeless.
You be aware that you're speaking to the crowd and not.
Do any of the homeless who receive a fine, are they able to pay it from any source or other? How do they pay for something they can't afford?
Well, some do pay it. Some are able to pay it and some are not, unfortunately. So again, homeless is such a broad general umbrella. Some can afford it and some cannot. So that doesn't really answer the question, but if folks don't pay the fine, there's a potential that it could turn into a warrant for their arrest and they can be in court. And then usually the standard punishment for violating some part of the city code might be a day in jail. Maybe that all, if anything.
Which is very good for you. Go on.
I'm sure it was. Nobody can hear.
Well, can you also come and sit closer?
Microphone for you people.
Yeah. Can you repeat the question?
I know it's awkward, but anyways, that everybody hears.
I guess we could have people rotate to come up here.
It's not perfect, but it'll work.
Question and answer.
Does the mic remove?
Let's see. I don't feel like it's wireless.
Is it?
No. Sorry.
How much lead does that have?
Just more flexible. Cool. I like that. All right. Well, now that we got a mic, we're going to move on to the second part of this question. Will you step up here, Sergeant Anders, please?
There we go.
Better? So we want to ask, how do you interact with the homeless population? What have those interactions been like for you?
So as Freely mentioned in my bio, I'm the supervisor of the Monterey Police Department Community Action Team. So if you're not familiar with the Community Action Team, it's a group of 5 police officers and 2 community service officers that work on all the community policing projects for the department. They work on special events and they work on long-term chronic quality of life issues. We interact with homeless on a daily basis. However, again, when we talk about homeless, for me, homeless is I'm working with folks that we would consider, if you consider function, these are very low functioning homeless type people. These are folks that are dealing with chronic drug and alcohol abuse, mental health conditions, or a combination of both. For us, that population it's about 100%, but we're only focusing on the most visible, most chronic problems for the community. We don't interact with a lot of folks that are still employed or are in shelter or things like that. We're dealing with those folks. If you've been to Window on the Bay, Laguna Grande Park, downtown, if you see those folks, those are the folks that we're interacting with on a daily basis. You know, and again, we meet people of all shapes and sizes, and a lot of times we're dealing with folks that they have a lot of barriers to get out of homelessness that are as a result of that drug and alcohol abuse or that mental health problems. And we try to offer them resources on a regular daily basis. And if they accept, that's great. But if they don't accept, then whatever reason what we're there for, whether it's just a consensual, proactive contact, how are you today, or someone calls because they're committing a crime, we're also taking enforcement on that crime. You know, it's a challenge for us. I tell all my officers and my community service officers to not give up, to be persistent and be patient with folks and try to talk to them every single day and ask them if they want help every day, because maybe tomorrow will be better. But a lot of times they decline the assistance because for whatever reason it is, they just don't want to quite break that cycle of homelessness today. So then we'll move on and try again tomorrow.
I like that. Yeah, it's got to be a tough job too. Now, that raises a question in my mind. What exactly is the protocol when facing these individuals to direct them towards more stability and help? For example, directing them towards some sort of facility where they could use a computer and make a resume, or have somebody help them build a resume, get them to Goodwill, get them, you know, some type of nice clothing so they could go get a job, get a shower, stuff like that.
So really what we do is we try to sit down and talk to them. I mean, you got to get to know who this person is to really figure out what are the issues that they're facing with and how can you address it. So for example, there was a young woman who was living in a motorhome with a very small child and another individual, and unfortunately that was in very, very bad, squalid conditions. It was unsanitary, and unfortunately that we had to step in and remove the child from that situation because it was a health matter, a health concern for the small child. But again, established a relationship with that woman, talked to her on a regular basis, and worked with her to make sure that she could overcome some of the barriers that were preventing her from getting on track. And it was things like, well, she had a warrant that she hadn't paid for in a different county for a very minor traffic violation. So we were able to put her in touch with that county to get her on a payment plan to get that taken care of. Well, then she needed to get her license fixed because she hadn't taken care of the warrant. So then we put her in touch with DMV to get that taken care of. So it's kind of just facilitating getting these folks to the right people that can help them with their particular issue. But again, you got to sit down and get to know them on a personal, really on a one-on-one level, and dig deep into what exactly is the background and what's keeping them back. So we also have the Monterey Homeless Exchange, which is a monthly meeting between the police departments and the Monterey Peninsula and the homeless outreach providers. And we specifically will bring up people in that meeting that we think that we can help, and we brainstorm between all the folks there. It's, you know, places like behavioral health, adult protective services, safe place, community homeless services, and we basically will pick a person and be like, what can we do to help this person? Sometimes we have success, sometimes we don't, but we meet monthly and we keep trying to address it.
Excellent. Also, step up. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge what you said, which is very true. We ask our police officers to deal with these problems, and yet they're very, very difficult, complex issues in play. And, you know, the underlying problems are something we as a society need to solve. And I also wanted to acknowledge the Monterey Police Department in particular, I think, has done an outstanding job of trying to balance both the needs of residents on the one hand and tourists and whatnot, as well as dealing with our homeless persons in the city in a humane way. And then, as the sergeant said, there are times when people cause problems, and I think it's always important to remember that those persons are a small minority of the total homeless population, but they are often most visible. And you know, their illegal actions need to be addressed. Being homeless is not illegal. That's somebody's condition, and our police officers understand that. And I'm really appreciative of the work they do.
So I think the larger issue as a society we have to ask is, why is it the trend across our country to criminalize poverty? And that at the city level and the county level, we need to start addressing as citizens that it's not illegal to be poor. It's not illegal, like Alan just said, to be living outside. Yet, we have a problem. And we are criminalizing. We give more problems to our police department than they should have to handle. They don't want to criminalize the poor, but sometimes from the state, from the Fed, from the state to the county to the city, we start criminalizing the poor. So I think you know, sit-lie laws. Who are those targeting? Right? Not targeting me. I'm a white man with a, you know, shaved and sit down on the sidewalk, I'm not gonna get it. But my buddy who is not well kept, who is walking around and then just wants to sit down, I don't think Sergeant Andrews wants to have to deal with that all the time. And so I think as a society, we have to start asking those hard questions and getting into city council meetings, getting in front of our county board of supervisors, and getting in front of our next congressperson, whoever that might be.
I think one of the things that Brian is sort of opening the door to is the complexity of the issue of homelessness. That it's our sort of sense of privilege, our sense of what we deserve, and who deserves and who doesn't deserve. And that's certainly one issue of it that we need to begin to talk about. The other issue is that, it's so complex. Anyone here ever tried to stop a bad habit or go on a diet or do any of those things? Yeah. I'd like to lose 10 pounds, but I am not going to lose 10 pounds overnight. And that's part of the complexity of the issue for homeless folks, is that it's a process. And that's why community folks having conversations, getting to know people, developing those relationships are so important, because it begins to address you're human. You're a valuable person, and it doesn't matter if you're poor. Poor doesn't determine if you have value or not. And you begin to think, maybe I could do this. Maybe tomorrow, when someone asks me or offers to take me to a social service agency, I can say yes to that. And so there's this long building block process. So yes, we have to have homes and houses and places for people to live, but there's a tremendous amount of work and time that it takes from the time someone becomes homeless until we can get them re-domiciled.
What Reverend Cindy says is probably the deepest fact of the homeless condition. I'm just going to share something real quick. I was practically homeless for like 6 months of my life. It's not that long. I was about 17, and I couldn't live with my mom anymore because we couldn't afford a place. So I was essentially couch hopping. I mean, I had shelter and stuff like that, but I really, at that time, I felt this kind of sense of shame and inability to kind of climb out of that trench. And then at one point, I was actually on the streets of San Diego for 2 weeks total, and I found a resolution. But what Cindy's saying is the underlying problem for each individual who is facing the circumstance. They usually probably see only inabilities to become one with society again and essentially be a contributive member, get a job, and find a place to live. And that's something that we as a society need to address, which I think Ethan really said very clearly that the police department does. And I want to commend you guys on that, definitely, because that's got to be hard. I mean, just facing that every day and holding your patience, and somebody says, oh, not today, and then you come across them the next day, tall can or something, I don't know. And like, oh, well, next time you need help, I'm gonna be there. So I commend your guys' effort. And I met similar people in those circumstances back in the day. But yeah, so I just want to say that real quick. I'm gonna move on. Yeah, for sure. I'm gonna move on to the next question. This is directed at you, Mr. Sondgroth. 59% of homeless respondents reported receiving some sort of government benefits, mostly in the form of food and shelter. This can be viewed as a negative effect on the economy because it reallocates resources that could have been otherwise used in the community. How might the county support its disadvantaged members while balancing the economic impact that homelessness has on the community?
Thank you. It's a good question, man. Might go just a touch over the place here, and again, if anybody wants to interject, has any questions, feel free. First, as far as, I don't know, I want to touch on something real quick, and I take this from Brian. We're all here, obviously, we're a group of, it's a room full of compassionate people who, again, can kind of organize and get things done. And I think one of the things that we need to, overall, talking about the homeless issue, me personally, I stole from Brian, was the really calling them more, treating them more so as humans, as far as like, it's not the homeless issue, it's our outdoor living brothers and sisters, our brothers and sisters living out on the streets. So I've kind of really adopted that into my own vocabulary, and I feel like if we can all kind of adopt that, I've just adopting that into my overall, the way that I speak about it has completely kind of opened the doors for more compassion and more understanding. So if we can all kind of start putting that out into the world instead of calling them dealing with the homeless issue, if we're able to kind of rebrand that as like, no, these are just human beings living outdoors that came across whatever circumstance, they landed in there. So I think that's, what's that?
Sleeping outdoors.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, I think sleeping outdoors, yes, correct. I think that's something important that all of us can take from today. But as far as when we start talking about the reallocation of resources, I think that can get messy on a national level with our tax dollars. When we start talking about the allocation of resources, when we're talking about our brothers and sisters living outdoors, when it comes to food stamp programs and so on and so forth. We don't like talking about corporate subsidies and whatnot. So as far as the argument is, when it comes to that, it can get kind of messy and ugly, but on a city level, when we do start talking about the reallocation of resources, when we are dealing with this particular issue, Utah has effectively pretty much eliminated its chronic homeless problem, and they're doing it literally saving $8,000 per person by essentially giving them homes and taking a shelter-first approach. So the current approach right now is to say, okay, this person ended up in this situation because of drug and alcohol abuse, right? And so we're gonna deal with that first, and then we're gonna deal with this, and then we're gonna try to find them a job, and all the way down the road, when really it's like, what's the biggest issue? Get them in a stable, actual, real situation where they can start feeling like a human being again, and then start to get connected to the resources. So I think that entire process that we kind of typically take is completely, it's out of whack. It kind of needs to get flipped over on the back end and say, no, let's put you into an actual stable situation first, and then it's proven again in Utah how effective that shelter-first approach can actually be. And I'm sure some of you probably have heard that, so I think a lot of the efforts kind of going forward, I mean, we need to put that at the forefront, is getting shelter-first solutions. That's something that I'll talk about here in a second as well. So yeah, I mean, just the math at that. So when we're talking about it at a city level, obviously in our county, we live in one of the richest cities in the nation. So I think there's plenty of ways to help our brothers and sisters sleeping outdoors. And so when you're talking about 2,308 people, times that by 8,000, you're looking at $18 million that we're saving. So what ends up happening when we get a phone call is that there's a lot of cost involved with that. So each person, each brother and sister living outdoors is accruing a big balance to the city and to the taxpayers. And essentially what a Shelter First program does is, if it's saving $8,000 a person, that's saving the city of Monterey $18 million. So I don't know why, I don't know how much that's been brought up. I can definitely do a lot better as far as bringing that to city council meetings, getting that conversation out there more, is like, it literally does make sense. Not even just on a fiscal standpoint, but then it also addresses all these other issues of where, okay, from a city standpoint, we don't want the image of Monterey County, we don't want that tainted any sense. So okay, now you have them in stable situations. That's great, that takes care of that problem as well. And then it takes care of, obviously, it's a successful program, so now people are getting rehabilitated, say if they have addictions, and that kind of encompasses the safety issues around the entire thing. And so that, again, that approach is so important. And a lot of times, obviously, when it comes to city and politics, money's huge. It's just how it is. And so, I mean, it just makes sense. It makes too much sense, honestly, for me. just speaking on a real level, it makes way too much sense not to adopt some sort of shelter-first approach. It's been proven, and there's more and more cities. There's a few up in Oregon, Washington. There's even a couple in California on a real small scale that is really proven to actually work. So that's encouraging, seeing that sort of momentum start happening. But I mean, there's no reason in Monterey County with the resources that we have right now that we do have to have such a problem even getting a warming shelter. That we have problems really getting investments into mental illness centers. I think we can use a big investment there, and I don't know. It honestly, to me, it doesn't make sense. It's a little bit frustrating, but I think it's something that we can really start talking about in the future. Is like, how do you take that blueprint that Utah's done so effectively and bring it here? And I know Brian's talked about possibly, in some way trying to get the person who kind of spearheaded that and bring it here and do some sort of symposium, get everybody on board and actually start taking initiative and taking action and getting shelter. My own miniature version of that, I build these things called lighthouses, which is essentially a tiny house, a little mini home. I can do different versions of them. I can do them a little bit bigger, smaller. They're on wheels, fully insulated, drywall, comes with a whole plethora of cool additions, even as far as a $50 tablet that can, in a sense, act as a phone, text messaging, all that. That's a $50 tablet, and they get free phone service. Super simple solution. And again, it's just taking a shelter-first approach. And my entire vision with that was to really just get our churches involved and to start placing these units that literally cost $500 to $1,000 depending on the size of the unit, which isn't a lot of money when we're talking about how some of the resources are allocated currently. I don't understand why there's so much, well, I guess I do understand why there's a lot of issue as far as implementing this at our churches, to bring in one or two of these units, and instead of what we kind of tend to do is to push our brothers and sisters away, and it's that whole NIMBY, the not in my backyard. Everybody kind of pushes them away, and I've talked to pastors and said, why don't we actually just bring our brothers and sisters in and actually treat them as human beings, and why don't we have a couple of these lighthouse units that cost $500 to $1,000 on the church property? Why don't we encourage the men's ministry, the women's ministry to get involved and to form relationships with these people and bring them in and build them up, and then obviously we can get them connected to the resources and so on and so forth, and you can go on from there. But it's something that I'm really going to be pushing harder here, especially in the next couple months, to really start getting a couple churches. Yes, sir?
I know I'm supposed to wait, but I can't contain myself.
It's all right.
When you have asked the pastors that, what do they say?
It all comes down to there's no clear answer. And we were talking about that before. There's really not a whole lot of clear answers. I personally believe that at the root of all of it is fear. There's not a whole lot of that type of blueprint out there, which, I mean, there's significant case studies, but Eric, go ahead too.
We've got 2 churches in Salinas that are ready to put 4 or 5 units on their property right now.
Sweet.
But the issue is infrastructure. You've got to have plumbing and electricity and all that the city wants, the county wants, which you can provide. And then you've got to have your church committed to surrounding those people and integrating with the community. But we've got to get our cities and our counties to agree from a planning and zoning standpoint also to support that, as long as the churches will step up and support each other. So it's happening. We're actually going to start building some prototypes of the prison.
Awesome.
With prisoners, and they're going to do it for free. We're going to start putting these on church properties when we get permits over in Salinas. So it can happen both sides of Salinas. It's cool.
Perfect. Al?
Yeah. I find it interesting that so many churches and city bodies find it easy to house refugees and difficult, unthinkable to house citizens of this country. We have folks that we know are in transition. The paperwork here says 40-some% are homeless for less than a year. They might be homeless for less than 90 days if we stepped up, but we take folks from, and I'm not saying don't take folks from other countries, but we take folks from other countries. I can recall a couple, several from, anyhow, churches take them in and they help them along, cool. But why can't we take the ones who live like this?
It's a great question, and I think it's kind of shocking that out of all the churches on the Central Coast, that it's Reverend Storrs that's one of the only ones who's taken action and starting to say, hey, let me bring on some of our brothers and sisters. I don't get that. There's way too many resources. There's way too many options. There's things like the tiny houses, like Eric's talking about, that I'm talking about as well, that we need to start taking action on and actually implementing this. Our churches, kind of right now, and I've been in these conversations, and especially with the bigger churches, is that's kind of something you don't want to touch. And that's something that we have to really, I mean, that's a heart issue. We need to, they're human beings. It's not just, oh, we don't want them, they have an addiction, whatever it is. Everybody here is broken. We're all a heck of a lot more alike than we are different. And until we really look at ourselves in the mirror and accept that, until, our whether it be our politicians, our church leaders, until they really are faced with that, like, hey, this could be any one of us here any day, then not a whole lot's going to change. And me personally, when I did do that experiment, when I did go out on the streets, going back to what Justin was talking about with the shame thing, I was on the streets no more than 48 hours with no food, water, money, and I actually had a tent and everything, and I consider myself a very driven, self-starter type, where I'm motivated, pumped up. Within 48 hours, just with the actual interaction that I was receiving, because I looked homeless and everything else, right? People ignoring me, people not responding to me, looking at me a certain way, so on and so forth, that just begins to beat at the human spirit, right? Imagine being out there for 6, 8, 9, 10, 12 months, 3 years, 5 years. How are you going to feel about yourself, right? And so the simple thing with all of us can do, without even having to change much or take all kinds of action, is to just start treating our brothers and sisters like brothers and sisters. And yeah, go ahead.
So basically what Todd is saying, the direct hindrance for any type of good social change is the social stigma that correlates with our outdoor living people. But for the sake of our time, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to move on to the next question.
I apologize.
That's wonderful.
Sorry about that, guys. I start going on. I'll go a little too crazy.
Don't apologize. So our next question, we're going to pose to Reverend Cindy Storrs. Half of all respondents were female. Do you believe the experience of homelessness is different for men and women? Why or why not?
Sorry, that's my phone. Yes, the answer is yes. The factors that lead to women becoming homeless are different in many ways and many times than factors that lead to homelessness for men. Women get evicted. They're the heads of households, which means they are on the street with their children. That's a world apart from a man on his own. The responsibility of your child weighs heavily. So there's a new book out called Evicted. You might want to pick that up. It chronicles the lives of some people and how eviction becomes this horrible, horrible cycle into poverty. Women often are homeless because of domestic violence or some sort of interpersonal conflict, or someone who was helping them can no longer help them. You have to go out. Female veterans, 3 to 4 times more likely to be homeless than your average woman. So I want to say a little bit about what we have been doing at the church. I came to this church a couple of years ago, and they were a church that wanted to have the One Starfish parking program, and they wanted to have interaction with women who were living in their cars, be supportive of that, do homework with kids, provide dinners and breakfasts and do all those kind of things. That went through a long process in the planning commission and we got denied our permit. But the church said, well, let's just keep doing something. So we said, all right, we'll have the warming shelter. So we housed 65 people over the course of the winter, January, February, and March, and April, actually April. Started out just men, and then at some point the I Help Women's program got into trouble, and so they expanded what we were doing, invited women to come and stay. The other thing that the church decided to do was that to open up the physical, our education building to women who were enrolled in One Starfish, the Safe Parking Program. That if they were already enrolled and managed and they were a client of that, then I said, I don't want women living in their cars. They can come in and stay inside and we'll make that work. So interestingly enough, we've had 3 women who have come in and lived in our buildings. And that really has challenged this congregation who thought, and to some degree were, open to the possibility of interactions with homeless folks. But now, we've had a woman living with us with her 13-year-old son for about a month. And now people are starting to ask me, how long is she going to be here? How long is she going to be here? This is a person who has her name on every housing list. She's signed up for transitional housing, and she's high on those lists because she has a child. She has a dependent that she needs to house. She's managed to keep him in school. She has managed to, we have helped her rent a car. But today she called me, she's got a job, and her son's on independent study, part-time job, and the person who was going to provide child care for her son while she was at work got sick. And she said, I can't have him sit in the car for 6 hours. And I said, leave him at the church and we'll just figure out how to do this. And she said, welcome to my world. But that is the reality. And her $500 aid package, no matter how far she stretches it, no matter how much we help her with dinner and breakfast and other resources, it's a long, 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 long journey to be able to put away enough money to get to a $1,000 a month apartment. I also want to say this about the church. So I think, I don't know why my brothers and sisters, there's a lot of reasons why they don't want to have folks living in their churches or staying in their parking lots. And a lot of it has to do with they don't want scratches on their walls, and they don't want their pews to get ripped, and they don't want dirt. So if you're a church person, go for the dirt, go for the rips, go for, it's just a building. It is just a building, and encourage your elders and your pastors and your other people. It's just a building. We're talking about human lives here. But I think what we need to do actually is look where the new church is. The church on the beach, the gathering for women, the places where new churches are creating themselves around ministry that is hands-on, that is boots on the ground, if you will, that is interacting, that is personable, that is not about the building and the pews. So.
I think Ms. Storrs, and to go with a previous comment made by Todd here, was kind of in the sense of priorities. Question?
Yeah, for Cindy, we work with the same ground. We've been staying there. If anybody here has a car that they would like to give away for very minimal amount, this lady she's talking about really needs a car, and that would really help her for the job. And I'm with the pastor at One Starfish, and we've been working with her on this gal. So if anybody here or knows of one, let Cindy or me know. I'm Pastor Jim Mills, pastor of the district.
You know, it's about doing the right thing for the right reason, because it's the right thing to do. And there's some conflict about what the definition of ministry is for a church. And that's part of what we sort of got into with the city council and the planning